Hey, I want to talk to you today about building communication. And that's kind of a pun, a play on words. It's not just how do you build communication, but the communication that needs to happen during construction or building your church. And I've written down 6 ways to communicate with your church builder. So I'm just going to jump right in. The first way is to build trust. And that starts, the reason that's the number one way to communicate with your church builder is you've really got to understand, number one, what it is in your mind that creates trust. And everybody's different. Different people have a natural level of trust. Yours may be more or less. And you really have to figure that out and then figure out the things that are going to have to happen in order for you to trust somebody that's going to help you build your facility. Now, building trust is a big part of that. You have to do your homework before you hire anybody. So building trust might mean going out and finding somebody that has actually done the kind of work that you're looking for them to do, that they have been engaged and are engaged in a church atmosphere. You want them to be equally yoked, and that's a very churchy terminology, but basically what that means is you want them to get what you're doing on a spiritual level, because this is a very challenging process that you're about to go through. And building churches it's not like building a retail store. There is a high spiritual element going into what you're doing. The second thing in building trust is hire people you like. You're talking about a 2.5 to 4 year process that you're entering into, and there's nothing more miserable than having day in and day out to deal with somebody that you don't like, personality rubs, and those kind of things. There's enough people in the marketplace that are good at what they do that you ought to be able to go out and find somebody that has relevant experience that you can get along with and you can build a relationship with, because all of that's going back to number one is going to build trust for you. Hey, the next thing you're going to want to do is ask questions. If you don't feel like you are irritating your church builder with the number and quality of the questions that you're asking, you're not asking enough questions. Unless you've built a lot of churches in your lifetime, you want to be asking questions, especially related to terminology and process. And by terminology, I mean we use a lot of words that ordinary people don't know. And so you're going to want to, every time one of those asks maybe or pops up, you're going to want to either write it down and keep a list of them so that you can come back later and say, hey, what does that mean? Or just ask outright. Just pause and say, hey, I'm not really getting what you're saying right there. And as far as process, the process that you go through building a church is not, to most people, it is not an innate process. There's a lot of times where you think, well, this should be this way, and it really isn't. So it makes a lot of sense to take the time and ask questions and say, okay, help me understand where we are right now and what's next, and how does that get us to the end and where we're going. And make sure that you're in line with the pre-construction schedule and the construction schedule. Make sure you're lining up your communication with the church, with your builder and with your design team, so that what you're communicating to the church is actually accurate information. Number 4 is communicate often, and by that I mean you need to set up regular times to communicate with your builder. Regular communication, there may not always be a reason for you to connect. I try to connect with my clients weekly, and what that does is it prevents conflict. So that if there's something that a missed expectation, or if there is a question that my client has, the worst it can be is a week old. So I'm trying to communicate regularly with them. I set that up with my client. I try to make an effective use of that time, from downloading information that's going on with the project, as well as educating the client on what's going to happen next, and any conflict that's arising, or any changes that are coming down the pike that they might expect, or even decisions that they've made to change things and they may or may not realize that those changes may actually incur a cost. So communicate often and find a way, an avenue for doing that. And that also helps build trust. Number 5 is address conflict. You cannot prevent conflict during a building process. It is absolutely going to happen, no matter how well you communicate. And even with all the other measures that I've talked about putting in place, you are going to have conflict in this process. One of our senior project managers is an ex-professional bull rider, and I think he would gladly tell you that even when you're extremely successful riding a bull, it's going to leave some bumps and bruises on you. And that's pretty much what church construction is. There is a lot of moving parts during this process. There is a million different opportunities for conflict to arise. And so you have to meet it head on. And what you're going to want to do is anytime you feel a little bit of rub, you want to address it right away in the context of your weekly meeting to make sure that things don't get too far out of line. And then there's a realignment of two things, really. You want to realign yourself with where you're going with the project and realign those expectations. And that's also a great time to recast vision of the church, because it's not about building buildings, is it? It's about reaching people for Christ. And there's always an opportunity to remind people in the midst of a carpet discussion or a wall discussion that, hey, this isn't about, the color of the carpet or where the walls go. It's about reaching people for Jesus. Are we still on track to reach people for Jesus? And that leads right into number 6, which is you got to remember the vision during this process. You have to plan ways to recommunicate the vision throughout this process. One of my favorite authors coined the phrase vision leaks, and it absolutely does. As the leaders of this process, you, as the people that are making decisions on your project, you have to understand the vision and where you're going better than anybody else, and you have to meditate on it until it becomes part of who you are and what God's doing. And then you have to cast that vision regular and often, and even develop language around that vision that resonates with people so that you can easily, with one sentence or two, communicate the vision and bring people back to center as you're moving through this process. Because again, there will be conflict, there will be personality rubs, there will be attacks from the enemy all through this process. And if you find a way to do these 6 things, I think your probability for an incredibly spiritual event to happen during the process of building your church is going to be well on its way. Hope this helps you guys. Have a great day.